UFO community going absolutely bananas. This amazing UAP site.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Levelland. This incident took place in 1957 in Levelland, Texas, and actually was the inspiration for a scene in the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind. In the real-life incident, dozens of citizens from across the city began individually reporting seeing a rocket or a strange set of lights or some sort of unidentified object, but that wasn't it. Whatever these citizens were seeing was also reportedly interfering with their vehicles as well. Engines were suddenly just dying out and lights were cutting out. If this happened to just one or two, this could have been some kind of a weird coincidence, but it was way too many instances. Something else had to have been at play. The authorities at first thought that the reports were a hoax until they too saw the strange lights as they began to investigate. This is where Project Blue Book came in and they started to investigate, and they came up with quite the conclusion. They claimed that whatever had happened here was simply just a case of an electrical storm and ball lightning that caused the lights and the mechanical malfunctions. That's super reasonable, but the catch with this explanation is that there were no reported storms or thunderstorms or rain in the area that night at all. I'm just saying, something here clearly isn't adding up quite right. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Belgium wave. Near the ending of November of 1989, citizens of Belgium were shocked to report seeing a big triangular UFO hovering in the sky. Aside from these reports from the visual witnesses, however, there wasn't any physical evidence supporting the existence of the UFO. Flash forward to a few months later in March of 1990, however, and new sightings began to pop up, but this time their presence was being confirmed by 2 military ground radar stations. Here's where things get really strange though. 2 F-16 fighter jets were sent out to investigate what the hell was going on, and this is when the pilots found that they couldn't see anything visually, but their radars were able to spot the target. While trying to keep track of these objects, the UFOs were moving way too fast, and the pilots ended up losing track of them. In the end, there were about 13,500 people who witnessed this UFO incident, which has made it one of the most widely experienced UFO sightings of the modern era. The Belgian Air Force has no idea what it was that they had witnessed, but they thankfully did acknowledge that some sort of unknown activity had taken place instead of just trying to sweep it under the rug and pretend like nothing ever happened. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Chicago UFO. This UFO sighting comes from November 7th, 2006, and it was at the O'Hare International Airport in Chicago. Flight 446 was getting ready to head to North Carolina when an employee from United Airlines that was on the tarmac noticed a dark gray metallic aircraft hovering over one of the gates. After this, 11 other employees and even a few people who didn't work there saw this gray saucer floating at around 4:15 p.m. The people who saw it explained that it hovered above the gate for about 5 minutes before it just shot itself upwards and broke through the clouds, leaving a hole in the clouds where you could see the blue sky through. The strangest thing, however, is that this flying saucer did not show up on the radar. The Federal Aviation Administration just called it a weather phenomena and would not investigate it, despite there being around 15 witnesses who all saw the same thing. This story, however, became the most read story on the Chicago Tribune's website and even went international because it certainly is very interesting. I also think at an airport they just want to, investigate strange occurrences, you would hope.
In our 7th spot, we have the East Mountain Radar Base. The East Mountain Radar Base in Vermont was a US Air Force base used during the Cold War. While in 1961, a number of men at the base reported a strange object flying in the sky. The object was located above the East Mountain and chilled there for about 18 minutes before taking off. Several military reports were actually filed after this incident. Now, what's strange is a couple of months later, a couple had a very scary UFO encounter, so people think that they saw the same UFO as the base did. In our 6th spot, we have Betty and Barney Hill. Now, this is one of the most famous alien abduction stories of all time, and it involves the couple that I just mentioned. So on September 19th, 1961, husband and wife Barney and Betty Hill were driving home one night after having a vacation in Niagara Falls. Around midnight, they saw this weird bright falling star in the sky. That was until they realized that whatever it wasn't falling, it was following them. So Barney pulled over, and sure enough, this bright thing was coming right at them. When it got closer, they saw humanoids inside of a rotating 40-foot-long UFO spacecraft. The next thing that they remember is hearing a bunch of beeps, and then they passed out. They woke up 2 hours later and were 35 miles down the road from where they originally pulled over. They reported what happened to them, and obviously people were skeptical. But a lot of things proved that they were right. Both Barney and Betty had scrapes on the top of their shoes, suggesting that they had been dragged somewhere. Betty also had these marks on her dress as well. And they underwent a series of interviews, and everything they said always matched. To this day, we don't know what to think. And to this day, the story gives me the creeps. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the Valensole UFO sighting. In July of 1965, a French farmer named Maurice Masse claimed he saw a spherical craft land in a lavender field and then saw 2 humanoid creatures exit. When they saw Maurice, one of the aliens pointed some object at him and he became paralyzed. The 2 then flew away. 20 minutes later, he finally was able to move again. Now, you might be like, he's lying, because honestly that was my initial reaction. But the UFO craft left a deep hole in the spot it landed. Later on, all the plants in that area died. And what's weird is that the area had a high amount of calcium. Why is that? I don't know, but it's weird. In our 4th spot, we have the Newtown Lights. On May 26, 1987 in Newtown, Connecticut, airline pilot Randy Edding decided to go for his daily nighttime walks. He liked to go out and just watch the skies, and he would like to play this game with himself, which was identify the passing planes. Well, at around 9:45 that night, he saw some strange orange and red lights pass by him. He had never seen such a sight, so he ran and got his neighbors' attention and told them to come outside. They saw a large round flying aircraft emitting bright multicolored lights. They saw it disappear over Interstate 84. Well, sure enough, cars on Interstate 84 saw this craft as well. They even pulled over to watch it. Some say they were forced to pull over because this craft made their car die. More than 200 people called the police and reported this UFO. According to some witnesses, the object was larger than a football field and was hovering in the air before vanishing into thin air. Moving on to number 3, we have Deputy Val Johnson. On August 27, 1979, Marshall County Sheriff's Deputy Val Johnson in Minnesota was out on patrol when he saw a strange bright light on part of the highway. Initially, he thought it was a crashed semi or a plane that needed to make an emergency landing, so he went to go investigate. But as he got close, he said that this light jumped through his windshield, hitting him like a 200-pound pillow. He was knocked completely out. When he woke up, he radioed for help, and his call to dispatch went as so. Something just hit my car, something attacked my car. I heard the glass breaking and the locks. The brakes locked up. I don't know what's going on. Now when the police got to him, they found John with his teeth fractured at the gum line and his eyes were badly burnt. His car was smashed and there was this weird mark on the top of his hood. To this day, there's no explanation for what happened to him besides aliens. In our 2nd spot, we have Levelland, Texas. Back in 1957, dozens of residents in Levelland, Texas reported seeing a weird object in the sky that would interfere with their vehicles. The first person to report it was a man who was driving on a country highway with his friend. He saw a 200-foot-long rocket rise up from a field and rush towards them. It was about to hit them, so they jumped out of the car and landed in a ditch. As it passed their truck, it caused it to rock side to side, and it killed the truck's engine. After that report was phoned in, the authorities received more and more similar reports. Drivers would see this spacecraft fly towards them, and as soon as it did, their cars would die. Police thought it was a hoax until they went out and also witnessed this mysterious craft and lights for themselves. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the Exeter incident. On September 3rd, 1965, a policeman was patrolling Route 101 in Exeter, England, when he saw a woman parked alongside the road. So he pulled over and got out to check on her. When he got to the woman's car, he found her out of breath and frantic. She claimed that a flying object with red flashing lights was chasing her. But that's not all. A few hours later, a young man arrived at the police station saying that he was trying to hitch a ride when he saw lights come out from a large field, then disappear, and then reappear behind the tree lines several times. The same police officer that found the woman decided to go with this man to the spot and see what was up. That's when he saw the lights himself. The following weeks, the police received over 60 reports from people who also saw these lights, all with very similar stories. How eerie.
Starting off at our number 10 spot, we have the Shag Harbor incident. This UFO encounter is often referred to as Canada's Roswell, so I was shocked that I hadn't heard of it before. Basically, this incident took place on October 4th, 1967, when an unknown object crashed into the water near Shag Harbor, which is a tiny town in Nova Scotia. There were at least 11 people who witnessed this object as it crashed, and many people claimed to have heard a whistling sound followed by a loud bang when the crash took place. The witnesses that claimed to have seen the UFO were all doing a bunch of different things at the time. One couple was just sitting on their porch, but the two witnesses that really get me are a flight pilot and a ship captain. On Air Canada Flight 305, First Officer Robert Ralph pointed out to Captain Pierre Charbonneau that there was something strange out the left side of the aircraft. They reported an object tracking along on a parallel course a few miles away and described it as brilliantly lit, rectangular object with a string of smaller lights trailing the object. Shortly after they first noticed it, there was a large but silent explosion near the unknown object, and then 2 minutes later there was a second explosion, but this one faded to a blue cloud. As for the ship captain, Captain Leo Howard Mercy saw 4 blips on his Decca radar that were totally stationary. This led to him looking up to the sky, and this is when he saw 4 bright objects sitting in a rectangular formation about 28 kilometers from the vessel's window. He wasn't the only one who saw it on board. The entire crew of nearly 20 fishermen stood on deck and watched. A man named Laurie Wickens was another one of the witnesses, and he and some friends ended up calling the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, because they saw a huge object floating in the Atlantic Ocean about 1,000 feet offshore. This is all super weird, and not only the RCMP but also the Royal Canadian Navy and the Royal Canadian Air Force became involved in investigations, but nothing was ever recovered or found. But it also revealed that all commercial, private, and military aircrafts along the eastern seaboard were accounted for, so what could have all these witnesses seen? Since they have never officially identified what it was, in the official Government of Canada documents it is listed as a UFO. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Lakenheath Bentwaters incident. If you flash back to the first installment of this series, in part 1 I spoke about the Rendlesham Forest incident, and this one is kind of similar to that one, which only adds to its bizarre nature. In August of 1956, radio operators at Royal Air Force Bentwaters began to notice something strange on the radar. Basically, there was some sort of aircraft, and whatever it was traveling at speeds of over 1,000 miles per hour. Of course, since this was near an Air Force base, they immediately sent training aircrafts up to intercept and investigate, but at that point it found nothing. Shortly after this, a ton of Air Force personnel on the ground began to see a bunch of bright lights in the sky, darting around quickly, and they were also being picked up on the radar again, this time traveling at even higher speeds, closer to 2,000 miles per hour. This is when they sent up 2 Venom interceptors and directed them towards the radar target that was now over Lakenheath. The pilot of the first Venom did achieve contact, but the UFO was quick to outmaneuver him and ended up behind him. The UFO actually chased this pilot for about 10 minutes, despite the pilot doing really aggressive, evasive tactics. The pilot was described as, quote, getting worried, excited, and also pretty scared during this encounter. In the end, they were forced to return to base, and the target remained on their radar screens for a short while before it disappeared. The Condon Committee looked into this case and made quite an unusual conclusion. They normally conclude that UFO sightings are due to some natural phenomena or aircraft, but in this incident they wrote, quote, in conclusion, although conventional or natural explanations certainly cannot be ruled out, the probability of such seems low in this case, and the probability that at least one genuine UFO was involved appears to be fairly high. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Valensole incident. Okay, I get it. Everywhere's gotta have their Roswell incident, and this one is said to be France's. This sighting was made by a man named Maurice Masse, who was a French farmer, and it took place in July of 1965. One day before starting work while outside smoking, Maurice witnessed an object coming out of the sky and landing in his lavender field about 200 feet away from where he was. He was of course frustrated at someone landing in his field and figured that it was likely a helicopter that made some sort of unauthorized landing, but as he got closer, things took a turn turn. He realized this was no helicopter and instead was some sort of oval-shaped structure that was standing on 4 legs. In front of the strange craft were 2 figures just under 4 feet tall. He explained that they were making sort of grumbling sounds and included a brief description of these creatures before explaining that one of them took out a pencil-like device and pointed it at him, which left him completely stuck in his tracks, just frozen in time. As he was stuck there, the creatures got back in their craft and took off, and after about 20 minutes he finally regained his ability to move. Here's the thing. To me, this sounds like a fantastical story, but there was some kind of physical evidence left behind that I, and many others, can't quite figure out an explanation to. Basically, the craft did end up leaving a mark. There was a hole and a lot of moisture left over from where the craft was. Like I mentioned, this was in the middle of a lavender field. Soon after, this area became really hard, almost like concrete, and definitely not like the soil everywhere else in the field, and all of the plants around this area started to die. Analysis of the soil revealed that there was a higher amount of calcium in the soil at the landing site than there was anywhere else in the lavender field. This definitely shows that there was some kind of unusual event. Could Maurice be telling the truth? In our number 7 spot today, we have the Lubbock incident. On August 25th, 1951, in Lubbock, Texas, a group of scientists from Texas Technical College were all hanging out in the backyard of geology professor Dr. W.I. Robinson. They were all just chilling, enjoying each other's company, until around 9:20 p.m. when they saw something strange. It was a V-shaped formation of 15 to 30 bluish-green lights that were passing overhead. They were completely confused over what it could be, but figured that the lights would likely reappear, which they did. About an hour later, the lights reappeared, and at this point, all of the scientists knew that they had witnessed something exceptionally interesting. But what was it? The scientists weren't the only ones to witness the lights either. About 350 miles away in Albuquerque, New Mexico, an employee of the Atomic Energy Commission's top secret Sandia Corporation, who had a high-level Q security clearance, had been sitting outside with his wife, quote, gazing at the night sky, commenting on how beautiful it was, when both of them were startled at the sight of a huge airplane flying swiftly and silently over their home. On the aft edge of the wings, there were 6 to 8 pairs of soft, glowing bluish lights. There were more sightings as well, all reporting a very similar thing. The group of scientists began investigating, tracking the lights, which they witnessed 12 more times. They measured the angle of the lights, they tracked the speed, and they attempted, unsuccessfully, to try and measure the UFO's altitude. Here's the deal with this though. The government did end up coming to investigate, but the official explanation for these lights is the most cryptic message I've ever seen. It read, quote, I thought that the professor's lights might have been some kind of birds reflecting the light from mercury vapor streetlights, but I was wrong. They weren't birds, they weren't refracted light, but they weren't spaceships. The lights that the professors saw have been positively identified as a very commonplace and easily explainable natural phenomenon. I can't divulge exactly the way the answer was found, because it is an interesting story of how a scientist set up complete instrumentation to track down the lights. Telling the story would lead to his identity, and in exchange for his story, I promised the man complete anonymity. Despite people claiming that this mystery has been solved, by this explanation, people are left with a lot more questions than answers. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Foo Fighters. On a late November evening in 1944, nearing the end of the Second World War, Lieutenant Fred Ringwald was riding as observer in a night fighter that was being piloted by Lieutenant Edge Luter with Lieutenant Donald J. Myers on radar. The men were in the Rhine Valley, which sits north of Strasbourg on the French and German border, when Lieutenant Ringwald saw something. He said, quote, I wonder what those lights are over there in the hill. When the rest turned to look, they saw 8 to 10 fiery orange glowing lights. They checked with the ground radar, but nothing was registering. The men thought that there was a chance that these lights could be some kind of air weapon, so they turned themselves to be ready to fight, only to have the lights suddenly vanish. The 3 men who experienced the strange lights at first didn't tell anyone about what they saw because they feared being ostracized by those around them. This all changed, however, when stories of similar sightings began to spread through their unit. As it would turn out, many other pilots and flight crews experienced these same orange glowing lights, and one pilot even experienced a strange cigar-shaped flying object. In this instance, the UFO was described as, quote, a wingless cigar-shaped object glowing red just a few yards off the plane's wingtip. Lieutenant Krasny, justifiably spooked, instructed the pilot to attempt evasive maneuvers, but the glowing object stayed right next to the jet for several minutes before it flew off and disappeared. Throughout the years, the explanations for what these people saw have ranged from things like combat fatigue to the works of Nazi astrophysicists, so at this point, what exactly happened here remains quite a mystery. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Big Flap. Back in 1952, while the panic over flying saucers was real, there was a bunch of strange reports of potential UFO sightings over the skies of Washington, D.C. These sightings later became known as the Big Flap, and they were being reported by civilians as well as military radar operators and pilots. In fact, there were so many people reporting these UFOs that a special intelligence unit of the US Air Force was sent in to investigate. What really sparked a lot of concern with these sightings is when radar operators at National watched the objects fly past the White House and the Capitol building. This is when 2 F-94 interceptor jets were sent to investigate, but both times as they approached the mysterious objects showing on their radar screens, they would just suddenly disappear. In the end, as a result of the investigation, what they found, or really the lack of what they found, combined with the official explanation that was released, only worked to fuel some early conspiracy theories that the government was working to hide the evidence that proves the existence of alien life. In our number 4 spot today, we have the disappearance. Frederick Valentich was an Australian pilot who disappeared under some unbelievably suspicious circumstances on a training flight on October 21st, 1978. During the flight, he radioed the Melbourne Air Traffic Control to let them know that he was being accompanied by an aircraft that was about 1,000 feet above him, and at the same time that his engine had begun to run roughly. Air Traffic Control responded to him by explaining that there was no known air traffic at that level, and Frederick explained that he could see a large unknown aircraft with 4 bright landing lights. He explained the aircraft approached him from the east and at first thought it was another pilot playing around with him. For the record, during a flight seems like a terrible time for someone to play a prank. He then went on to explain that the mysterious aircraft was orbiting him and had a green light on it. When Air Traffic Control tried to get further details and asked what kind of aircraft it was, Frederick responded by saying, "It's not an aircraft." After this, his radio transmission was interrupted by a metallic scraping sound, and this is when all contact was lost. Sea and air search began, but to no avail. There have been speculations that don't involve alien abductions, such as a staged disappearance, the possibility of Frederick getting confused and flying upside down, and potentially even him taking his own life. All of these theories have been debunked in some sort of way, and neither the aircraft or Frederick himself have ever been found. The reason why alien abduction has been the main theory in this case is due to the fact that many reported UFO sightings came on the same night in the same region as his disappearance. It of course leaves us with more questions than answers, but it is all very interesting and very mysterious. In our number 3 spot today, we have Apollo 11. We can sit here on Earth all day and talk about the potential for alien life, talk about UFO sightings, but who would know more than people who have actually been to space, which are of course astronauts. Definitely on the list of coolest and scariest jobs in the entire world, there haven't been a ton of people who have had the unbelievable privilege of experiencing space firsthand, but there are even less of them who have claimed to see something that seems completely unexplainable. People who have claimed these sort of things include Edgar Mitchell, Catherine Coleman, and Dr. Brian O'Leary. The very interesting part about many of these claims is that they also include some sort of government cover-up as well. There was also Buzz Aldrin, who spoke about his Apollo 11 experience, and he detailed the crew seeing something flying alongside them, and at first they believed it was the final stage of a detached rocket, but then Mission Control confirmed that it was actually 6,000 miles away from them, leaving them with no answers on what the flying object could be. I can't imagine going to space at all, let alone encountering a UFO flying right beside you. In our number 2 spot today, we have the FBI documents. In a video that was released by the hacktivist group Anonymous a few years ago, they discussed some sort of FBI documents that are apparently declassified and just sitting on the website waiting for anyone to come across. These documents apparently suggested that we not only have been visited by aliens, but also by beings from other dimensions. This document was sent in 1947, and while it didn't originate from within the FBI, it It was sent in by a university department head, and it was treated with the utmost importance by the FBI. The document goes on to say that the aliens that have visited aren't from a planet as we think of it, but rather some sort of etheric planet that interpenetrates with our own, but we just aren't able to perceive it. They're able to consciously make the decision to enter our plane, and in the same respect, exit it whenever they want. The document says that all visits are peaceful, and that they are for the purpose of scoping out our planet as they might want to call it home one day. This certainly is one of those things that you have to draw your own conclusions from, and while it's good to remain skeptical, it's also imperative that we keep our minds open, because who are we to say for sure? In our number 1 spot today, we have the 2021 UFO. On February 21st of 2021, a blogger was using a radio scanner to try and pick up the feed from an aircraft when he received much more than he ever expected. He intercepted the transmission of the wrong aircraft, but at the right time. As an American Airlines flight was headed from Cincinnati to Phoenix around 1:19 p.m., the pilot came on the radio to ask the question, "Do you have any targets up here? We just had something go right over top of us." After this, he followed up with, "I hate to say this, but it looked like a long cylindrical object that almost looked like a cruise missile type of thing moving really fast right over the top of us." Not only were FAA air traffic controllers not able to see any object in the area on their radar scope, but they still have been unable to identify exactly what it could have been. This does happen more often than any of us really know, and it is possible that the object could have been a part of some covert military or Navy operation, but it certainly raises some alarm bells that it was unable to be tracked in any sort of capacity. I wonder if this is one of those stories that will remain a mystery, or if one day we'll maybe get some sort of answers as to what exactly happened. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Project Grudge Report 13. Okay, I've read quite a few different UFO sighting stories and stories of alleged alien abductions, and this is fully one of the most terrifying I have ever heard of. So basically, the story starts off in March of 1956 when Jonathan P. Lovett was assisting Major William Cunningham in the White Sands Missile Testing Grounds near Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. The pair were out searching for debris from a recent rocket test when Major Cunningham heard a loud scream. His first thought was that Sergeant Lovett had been bitten by a snake, so he went around to help aid his partner, and this is when he allegedly saw something that he never expected. He recounted seeing the sergeant being dragged away by some sort of long serpentine arm that had wrapped around his legs. Whatever this creature was, it was connected to a hovering disc that was in the air about 15 feet away. The major stood there in horror as he watched this creature and the sergeant retreat into the craft, which then rose vertically into the sky. Of course, he radioed for help, and while he was taken to the hospital for observation after this, search teams were sent out immediately. It wouldn't happen until 3 days later that they would find the body of Sergeant Lovett only 10 miles away from the site where he was said to have disappeared from. The autopsy performed on him later also only raised more questions than answers, as his body was severely harmed. So of course there was an investigation that happened, and many people claim that this investigation was detailed in a 600-page document labeled Project Grudge Report 13. But the problem with this is that no official information on Report 13 exists, and the US government denies its very existence at all. Though Grudge Reports 1 through 12 have been declassified along with Report 14, no official mention or accounting of Report 13 exists, and the story solely relies on secondhand accounts of this horrible incident. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Air Force disappearance. On the night of November 23, 1953, near the Canadian-US border, the United States Air Defense Command noticed a blip on their radar where there shouldn't have been one. This was showing that there was some sort of unidentified object that was in restricted airspace over Lake Superior. In response to this, an F-89C Scorpion jet was sent to investigate with 2 crew members. First Lieutenant Felix Moncla was piloting the craft, while Second Lieutenant Robert Wilson was observing the radar. Once in the air, the pair had trouble tracking the object, which kept changing its course, which then led to ground control helping to direct them. The jet pursued the unknown object for 30 minutes as it closed in on it at 500 miles per hour. After a while, the 2 blips on the radar, one being the unknown object and the other being the investigating jet, converged into one point, and then suddenly the radar return from the F-89 simply disappeared from ground ground control's radar scope. Shortly after this, the radar blip that was from the unidentified object also veered off and then vanished. The men who were sent to investigate in the jet never returned from the mission, and there was never any wreckage found signifying an accident despite extensive searches. The men and the jet just disappeared completely. It is said that the explanations for the disappearance that have been released throughout the years have changed and flip-flopped in what they say happened, so at this point, no one has any idea what really went on here. In our number 8 spot today, we have Dr. Brian O'Leary. Dr. Brian O'Leary is a former NASA astronaut and Princeton physics professor, and he has been quoted as saying that there is abundant evidence that we are being contacted, that civilizations have been monitoring us for a very long time, and that their appearance is bizarre from any type of traditional materialistic Western point of view. Apparently, he also said that these visitors use the technologies of consciousness, they use droids, they use co-rotating magnetic disks for their propulsion systems, which seems to be the common denominator of the UFO phenomenon. I obviously have no idea how I could possibly substantiate these claims, but they certainly are interesting, regardless of what you personally believe. And based on his education and work experience, it really is quite compelling. This could, of course, just be nonsense in order to stir up the masses, but it could also be someone who's finally telling us all the truth, but we're just too skeptical to believe it. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Project Blue Book sighting. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Richard French was once tasked with being an investigator for Project Blue Book, which was the name used to describe a study of UFOs conducted by the United States Air Force from March of 1952 to December 17, 1969, when the project was terminated. While his job was meant to be to investigate and essentially debunk UFO sightings, later in life he took to Congress to stand up to explain his own UFO encounter that he was never able to explain away. The moment that truly stuck with him all of these years was back in 1952 when he set off to Newfoundland after there were reports of a UFO that had crashed off the coast of St. John's. As he arrived to the scene, there were at least 100 people who all stood and stared into the water, and as he was able to follow their gaze and see what they were looking at, he couldn't believe his eyes. He recalled the water being quite clear, and under it you could see 2 circular crafts, each one approximately 18 feet in diameter. He said that they were both floating just below the surface of the water, no more than 20 feet from shore, and not only this, but he could also see 2 beings with the crafts. He said, quote, "The first thing I saw was the UFOs, and it was apparent to me that they were doing something to the craft, and I couldn't really tell what because they were on the bottom side of it and not visible to me, except when they would occasionally get over to the side where I could see them." He claims he watched on as the beings worked on the craft until one of them raised out of the water and disappeared, but not before accelerating to speeds in the neighborhood of 2,500 to 3,000 miles an hour. In our number 6 spot today, we have the classified report. We aren't even a full month into 2023, but already there are some crazy announcements, including one regarding a report that was delivered to Congress from the Director of National Intelligence. Basically, since August of last year, there has been a total of 510 unidentified aerial phenomena observed in protected airspace or near sensitive facilities. According to the report, 26 of them were described as drones, 163 were labeled as balloons or balloon-like entities, and 6 were described as clutter, whatever that means. This is all fine and well, but the concern sets in when we consider that this leaves 171 sightings unaccounted for, some of which, quote, appear to have demonstrated unusual flight characteristics or performance capabilities. It's also important to note that the majority of these sightings are coming directly from Navy and Air Force pilots. Here's the thing, what we as the public know is only a 12-page declassified summary of the actual, real, secret report that was delivered to Congress. Only time will tell if we ever find out what the rest of the report includes or what will happen with the further investigation into the 171 sightings, but hopefully if answers do arise, one day we'll find out. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Westall incident. Taking it back to 1966, we have the largest mass UFO sighting in Australia that, at the time, was largely ignored. This incident took place when over 300 students and staff members of a school in Melbourne all witnessed multiple UFOs silently flying through the air before they landed in a nearby field. While there's been a ton of speculation about this incident in the many years it's been, one witness account stands out among the rest, and that is the account made by the science science teacher from the school, Andrew Greenwood. He was alerted to the UFO event by a hysterical student, and when he went outside to see for himself, everything changed. Previously a skeptic of UFO stories, Andrew's mind was abruptly changed when he saw, as he described it, a round silver object about the size of a car with a metal rod sticking up in the air. He went on to explain that suddenly 5 planes came and surrounded the object, all while more people were gathering to watch. He called what happened next the most amazing flying he had ever seen, explaining that, quote, every time they got too close to the object, it would slowly accelerate, then rapidly accelerate, and then move away from them and stop. They would take off after it again and the same thing would happen. This went on for about 20 minutes before the mysterious object just vanished. As weird as this all was, what was almost weirder was what happened next. Firstly, the headmaster of the school is said to have tried to put a stop to anyone talking about the incident at all, threatening severe punishment to any student or staff who was caught speaking about it. And when the Royal Australian Air Force contacted him, he refused to talk to them about it at all. There have also been stories of witnesses getting visits from people warning them not to speak of the incident. Andrew explained, quote, when he asked the physical education teacher to describe what she had seen herself so that he could compare it with his own observation, she just wouldn't say anything. Another witness who did talk to Andrew and described what she had seen in great detail, just 30 minutes later refused to speak to him and wouldn't say a word. Was this because of the threats from the headmaster, or was something else going on here? This is definitely a strange UFO story that leaves behind a lot of questions. In our number 4 spot today, we have Flight 1628. Back on November 17, 1986, Japan Airlines cargo flight 1628 was flying from Paris to an airport near Tokyo when they had a very strange UFO encounter. On the part of the flight where they were over Alaska around 1711, the crew witnessed 2 unidentified objects to the left of their craft. The 2 objects rose up quite quickly to meet the craft and continued to fly alongside it. Each object had 2 rectangular things that are said to have appeared to be some sort of glowing nozzles or thrusters, but the crew on the plane couldn't see much else. They weren't able to see if there was anyone or anything inside. The closer these objects came to the plane, the more light was let inside, so much so that at the closest points, the plane's cabin was totally lit up, and the captain even said he could feel heat from the lights on his face. After this, the 2 objects left, but this was not the end, because a third, much larger disc-shaped object showed up and started following the plane. In the end, the plane needed to make an emergency landing in Anchorage, Alaska, because this third craft was seriously large and incredibly frightening, and they just needed to figure out what was going on here. The plane landed successfully and investigations were conducted, but to this day, no one is exactly sure what the men on board saw, but the entire crew witnessed the exact same thing. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Mount Rainier incident. This incident took place when Kenneth Arnold was en route from Chehalis, Washington to Yakima, Washington on June 24, 1947. Kenneth was traveling in a privately owned plane when he suddenly saw a bright flash on his wing. He looked around and this is when he saw a chain of 9 unidentified flying objects approaching Mount Rainier. He explained that he, quote, could see their outline quite plainly against the snow as they approached the mountain. He continued on saying, quote, they flew very close to the mountain tops, directly south to southeast down the hog's back of the range, flying like geese in a diagonal chain-like line, as if they were linked together. From here, he explained that, quote, they were approximately 20 or 25 miles away, and I couldn't see a tail on them. I watched for about 3 minutes, a chain of saucer-like things at least 5 miles long swerving in and out of high mountain peaks. They were flat like a pie pan and so shiny they reflected the sun like a mirror. He also told investigators that he had never seen anything travel that fast in his life. Unfortunately, Kenneth's story was met with disbelief and a bit of ridicule. This made Kenneth quite resentful, but he said, quote, they can call me Einstein, Flash Gordon, or just a screwball, but I am absolutely certain of what I saw. He added that if he ever again saw phenomena in the sky, even if it were a 10-story building flying through the air, he would not say a word about it. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Broadhaven UFO sighting. This UFO sighting took place back in 1977, and it all started when an entire class of children all claimed to see some sort of object flying through the sky. The children rightfully were confused and excited over what they have seen, but of course the teachers and adults around them believed it was just their wild imaginations making things up. This is when they decided to split all of the children up and have them draw whatever it is that they saw. While there of course were variations in all of the children's drawings, they all basically drew the exact same thing, which begs the question, did they really all see this thing? The children weren't the only ones who saw it either. Shortly after their sighting, other local residents began to explain that they had seen something strange flying through the air, including one hotel owner. One of the things that really gets people about this case and these sightings in particular is that all of these people claim to have seen something at that time, and even though it's been almost half a century, not a single one of them has ever said it was a hoax or that they were lying about what they saw. They all have the same story they did the day it happened. Finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have Betty and Barney Hill. The Betty and Barney Hill case is definitely one of the most famous UFO abduction stories ever told, and it absolutely has some pretty compelling components. Basically, the story goes that the two were driving on a road in New Hampshire one night on the way home from a trip the pair had taken. Before they got in the car on their way home, they were at a diner and figured that if they really pushed through, they could beat the wind and rains from an approaching hurricane. It was 10 p.m. when they left the diner, and they figured by around 2 a.m., 3 a.m. latest, they'd arrive home. As they drove, out of nowhere a bright light started to follow them. Suddenly, they arrived home, and it's somehow daylight now, their clothes are dirty and ripped, and their watches had stopped working. This is all jarring enough, but neither Betty nor Barney could figure out what had happened. They were both missing time. Later, during a session with a psychiatrist, they were able to recall being touched by aliens during their abduction. Project Blue Book would come to investigate their claims, and while people remain skeptical, no one has ever been able to debunk their story. This officially went on to become the first ever widely publicized abduction story, and to this day people still debate what really happened to the Hills.
Starting off this countdown, we have the New Jersey Turnpike. On July 14th, 2001, tons of individuals stopped in awe as they saw strange orange and yellow lights in a V formation in the sky. It was just after midnight when these mysterious lights appeared. They were so strange that a number of drivers stopped along the highway to look at the sky. Apparently, these lights lasted for around 15 minutes before disappearing. Daniel Tarrant, who worked for the police department, was one of the many witnesses of this bizarre event. And apparently over a dozen calls were made to the local police department reporting these lights. It definitely freaked a lot of people out. Now, what's even freakier is that air traffic controllers said that it's impossible for airplanes or jets or space flights to have made that light. So that's just ruled completely out. To this day, we still don't know what the mystery light show was. But of course, it's probably aliens. Coming in at number 9, we have the Pentagon footage.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. Oh my gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west.
So in April of last year, the Pentagon released footage of what they said was an unidentified flying object. These videos were recorded back in 2004 and 2015, but were only finally released when they thought it was safe to do so. So in one of the videos, you can see what appears to be a UFO flying in the sky. It was taken by naval aviators, and it shows some sort of objects moving through the sky. In the video, you can hear the pilots are in shock at what they're seeing. In fact, one of the pilots that witnessed this phenomena and captured it on video told CNN that the disc moved in ways he couldn't explain. Apparently 1 second it was there, and then next thing you know, it disappeared. He said, and I quote, "As I got close to it, it rapidly accelerated to the south and disappeared in less than 2 seconds. This was extremely abrupt, like a ping pong ball bouncing off a wall. It would hit and go the other way." Now that's pretty creepy if you ask me. Then play 18 seconds to 30 seconds.
Look at that thing, dude.
At number 8, we have the O'Hare Airport saucer. On November 6th of 2006, 12 employees at the O'Hare International Airport in Chicago witnessed a saucer-shaped craft outside of the airport. Several other people outside of the airport saw this as well. It occurred at around 4:15 p.m. that day. Witnesses say that the UFO hovered in the sky for about 5 minutes before shooting upward. When it did this, it created a big hole in the clouds. Airport employees claim that this was no way an airplane. The object was dark gray in color and around 6 to 24 feet in diameter. Some say it looked like a frisbee was just spinning in the sky, but others claim it wasn't rotating, it was just hovering. What's even weirder is how the object was very quiet. Again, to this day, no one knows what on earth it was that they saw. Maybe because it wasn't from Earth.
In our number 7 spot today, we have the Roswell incident. This whole rigmarole started in 1947 when some sort of crash took place near a ranch in Roswell, New Mexico. Shortly after this, the Roswell Army Airfield released a statement saying that they had recovered a flying disc from the ranch, but the Army quickly retracted the statement and said that it wasn't that, but instead it was just a conventional weather balloon. This was a little sketchy, but most people let it slide until the 1970s. What happened in the 70s is that a retired lieutenant colonel began to speak out. In an interview with a UFO researcher, he said that the weather balloon story was a cover-up and that alien remains were actually recovered from the crash site. There were both first and second-hand witnesses who claimed that not only were there at least one, but possibly more alien spacecrafts that had crashed at the scene, that there were also extraterrestrial remains that were recovered by the military, who then began to engage in a cover-up. In 1994, the story changed from a weather balloon to a nuclear test surveillance balloon from Project Mogul, and it was stated that the stories of the alien bodies were probably just test dummies that had been dropped from high altitudes. I'm not gonna lie, the whole thing sounds a little sketchy. I obviously wasn't there, so I can't say for certain what happened, but someone is definitely lying. I'm just not sure who. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Stephenville UFO. In January of 2008, in the small town of Stephenville, Texas, a bunch of residents all saw something in the sky that they couldn't believe. In the beginning, it appeared to be white lights in the sky that were first in a single arc, but then they quickly moved to form 2 parallel lines. It was estimated that the lights were spanning about a mile long and half of a mile wide, but the craziest part is that it was flying at 3,000 miles per hour, which is similar to the speed of a fighter jet, but there was no sound reported at all. The government chalked this sighting up to a US Air Force flight operation, but many of the residents who saw this event on that day were absolutely not convinced and truly felt like they were lied to. Some even explained that what they saw was too technologically advanced for the human civilization. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Rendlesham Forest incident. This incident is often referred to as Britain's Roswell incident, and it took place in December of 1980. The incident took place in the Rendlesham Forest, which is a pine forest in England that, at the time, sat in between 2 United States Air Force bases, RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge. Over several nights around this time of year, actually, a number of credible military personnel reported strange and colorful lights both above as well as in the forest. Some of those who were sent to investigate the strange lights reported seeing a triangular craft at close range, and there was even a famous audio tape made of the encounter. After these happenings, the UK Ministry of Defence claimed that the incident posed no threat to national security, and because of that, it was never investigated further. What really happened in the forest all those years ago remains a total mystery, but those who actually witnessed the lights and the aircraft are said to have remained totally baffled. In our number 4 spot today, we have the unexplained UFO. In 2017, after the existence of the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program became more well known, a video was released of an encounter between an FA-18 Super Hornet and some sort of unidentified flying object. There weren't a ton of details released about exactly what happened during this encounter, but using the Raytheon Advanced Targeting Forward-Looking Infrared Pod, they were able to capture an extremely fast-moving white oval that was around 45 feet long. The oval had no wings, and it didn't appear to have any kind of exhaust either. They were tracking the UFO at an altitude of 25,000 feet just above the Atlantic Ocean, and then they were shocked as the craft rotated on its axis and flew away. There was no explanation released with the footage because it truly is unbelievable and currently unexplainable. In our number 3 spot today, we have the USS Princeton UFO. This UFO sighting comes from 2004. On November 14th of that year, the USS Princeton Princeton noticed an unknown aircraft of some sort that was about 100 miles off of the coast of San Diego. For 2 weeks prior to this crew had been tracking a strange flying object that would start out at around 80,000 feet before extremely quickly dropping to hover right above the Pacific Ocean. Black Aces Commander David Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Jim Slate of Strike Fighter Squadron 41 went over in 2 fighter jets in order to kind of scope out the situation, and when they arrived, they saw what at first appeared to be churning water, while there was just an oval shape just below the surface. After this, a white oval-shaped object appeared above the water, but it had no markings on it at all. Like, no windows, nothing that would indicate an engine, no wings, and the infrared monitors on the jet didn't pick up any sort of exhaust. The commander and lieutenant commander tried to intercept this strange aircraft, but it very quickly flew away and reappeared on the monitor 60 miles away. Like, when I say quickly, I mean it was moving at 3 times the speed of sound and over twice the speed of fighter jets. So faster than any kind of technology we currently have. We still don't know what exactly this was, but sure, a lot of us are thinking the same thing. In our number 2 spot today, we have the cigar-shaped UFO. Let's set the stage. It's 2:45 a.m. on July 24th, 1948, and there are 20 passengers aboard a twin-engine propeller plane that is at 5,000 feet being flown from Houston to Atlanta by pilot Clarence S. Childs and co-pilot John B. Whitted. Out of the 20 passengers on board, 19 of them are asleep at these early morning hours, and everything seems to be going as per usual, until it wasn't. The 2 pilots and the 1 passenger who were awake all witnessed the same thing about 20 miles southwest of Montgomery, Alabama. About a week after the incident, the pilot explained what he had seen by saying, quote, "It was clear there were no wings present, that it was powered by some jet or other type of power, shooting flames from the rear some 50 feet. There were 2 rows of windows which indicated an upper and a lower deck, and from inside these windows a very bright light was glowing. Underneath the ship there was a blue glow of light. By his estimates, he watched the UFO for about 10 seconds before it completely vanished." The co-pilot gave a similar explanation and also added, quote, "The object was cigar-shaped and seemed to be about 100 feet in length." He continues on, quote, "I asked Captain Childs what we had just witnessed, and he said that he didn't know." While this is obviously very strange and peculiar, what has driven UFO enthusiasts even more is the fact that this strange sighting was of course later investigated by the US government, but the results of that investigation have allegedly been mostly destroyed. Does that mean maybe they found something they aren't willing to share yet? Some people believe that perhaps the pilots and passenger witnessed a secret Soviet spy craft. Others believe it was definitely something of the extraterrestrial variety. In our number 1 spot today, we have the New Jersey UFO. This UFO sighting took place in 2001 just above the New Jersey Turnpike. On July 14th, 2001, just after midnight for around 15 minutes, motorists driving down this highway stopped to stare at the sky to witness what no one could believe. There were strange orange and yellow lights in a V formation just above the Arthur Kill waterway. There were a ton of witnesses who were all extremely confused and shocked as to what they were seeing. Air traffic controllers initially denied that there were any flying objects that could have caused the mysterious lights, but a group that is called the New York Strange Phenomena Investigators claimed that they received radar data that night that would corroborate the story that the witnesses were telling. It may not have been aliens, but it certainly was some sort of unidentified flying object that no one had ever seen before, and there were people from all walks of life witnessing it together.
So starting us off at number 10, cover-ups. So this might not be news in regards to the idea of alien life and the government's involvement, as it's long been theorized by believers that the government has been covering up truths in relation to ETs and UFOs. But if we are to believe what was said in Congress, then that means the theory wasn't wrong. A former intelligence official testified last Wednesday that the United States government has found and covered up evidence of extraterrestrial life for decades. One of the witnesses, retired Major David Grush, alleged at a House of Representatives hearing about UFOs that the Pentagon has recovered crashed vehicles and biological remains believed to be of non-human origin. Quote, "I was informed in the course of my official duties of a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program to which I was denied access. My testimony is based on information I have been given by individuals with a long-standing track record of legitimacy and service to this country, many of whom also shared compelling evidence in the form of photography, official documentation, and classified oral testimony." So yeah,
And it only gets crazier from here. Moving on to number 9. Caught on video. Now, as I mentioned, there were 3 military veterans that were a part of this hearing. We touched on David Grush in the last point, but the other 2 witnesses, Ryan Graves, Executive Director of Americans for Safe Aerospace, and retired Navy Commander David Fravor, both testified they too had personal experiences with UFOs while on the job. One of the more shocking incidents in particular detailed by Fravor was an incident from 2004, where a UAP was caught on video. Now, UFOs, or UAPs as they're formally referred to by military personnel, are defined as any object that is detected but cannot be immediately explained. And while some end up having innocent explanations like being weather balloons or drones, others remain quite the mystery. The 2004 incident falls into the latter category. Fravor said it was several years before any officials followed up on the extraordinary events of the day, and even then, he added that nothing was done. Moving on to number 8. There's a support group. Obviously, there was a lot of juicy information being revealed at the hearing, and I don't know if this was news to everyone, but it was to me, so I'm adding it. The former Navy pilot Ryan Graves talked about how he had founded the Americans for Safe Aerospace group that supports aviators who have reported UAPs, which might not sound like the craziest thing compared to what else was revealed. I mean, there are support groups for tons of different things, but to think that people are likely to require support after coming forward with unexplainable sightings is kind of crazy. Like, what is happening after they submit this report? What did they see? What did their superiors do to them? Graves stated that the objects that are reportedly being seen by military and commercial pilots are, quote, performing maneuvers that are unexplainable due to our current understanding of our technology and our capabilities as a country. Further adding, quote, if everyone could see the sensor and video data I witnessed, our national conversation would change.
And at number 7, we have the Maury Island incident. This one is crazy. Like, I don't even know what to believe anymore. So on June 27th, 1947, a man named Harold Dahl, his young son, and his dog went out on a conservation mission. While out on the fishing boat, they saw 6 donut-shaped aircrafts hovering in the air above them. The crafts then started dropping weird molten-type waste onto the lake. He described it as if it was raining lava or white metal. This ended up hitting his son's arm and the dog. The son was badly injured, and sadly the dog didn't survive. After the incident, obviously word got out, and then some man approached Harold saying that he also witnessed something exactly like that. But then Harold was also approached by another guy who he called, like, you know, the Men in Black, and was told not to talk about the incident. So again, pretty freaking creepy. In our 6th spot, we have the Westall UFO. Now, this next UFO sighting was actually talked about on Magellan TV's documentary called Westall 66 Suburban UFO Mystery, another great documentary. So on April 6th of 1966 in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, a weird UFO was seen flying in the air. This was seen by more than 200 students and teachers at a nearby school. It happened at around 11 a.m. that day. The students and teachers were outside playing sports when they saw this saucer-type object in the sky. It scared a lot of the students and stunned the teachers. They described it as being a silver shiny aircraft with a purple hue to it. Others say it was more green in color. But it was twice the size of a family car. On top of that, some say they saw 1 disc, while others say that they saw 3. This incident was explored by the Victorian Flying Saucer Research Society and Phenomena Research Australia, but they haven't been able to rationalize it. To this day, it's considered one of Australia's major unexplained UFO cases. There's way more to this case than I have time to talk about, so if you want to learn more, then check out the documentary. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the Stephenville sightings. Stephenville is a small and quiet town in Texas. Nothing too crazy happens there, it's mainly just known for its dairy farms. But on January 8th, 2008, something quite strange happened that rocked that quiet town. On this day, dozens of residents saw white lights above Highway 67. A local pilot claimed that the lights, and I quote, spanned about a mile long and a half a mile wide and traveled about 3,000 miles per hour. The lights were accompanied with silence. Now, the US Air Force did claim that it was just a plane flying in the area, but the residents aren't buying this excuse. They said, and I quote, what they saw was too technologically advanced for current human abilities. Coming in at number 4, we have the USS Unknown Craft. In 2004, a Navy missile cruiser picked up some weird radar signals coming from an unknown craft. The cruiser was sailing off the coast of Southern California when this happened. It was coming from an object in the sky. Then apparently at some point the crew saw an oval-shaped object drop into the water. The water began to churn around it. Then a few seconds later the object shot back out of the water and accelerated away. They claim it moved more than 3 times the speed of sound and more than twice the speed of fighter jets. In our third spot, we have Kenneth Arnold. On June 24th, 1947, a private pilot named Kenneth Arnold witnessed something pretty creepy while out flying. So on that day, Kenneth was out flying looking for a US Marine Corps airplane that crashed near Mount Rainier. There was a reward for anyone that could locate the plane. But while out looking, he saw 9 bright lights emitting from a shiny UFO. He claims it was traveling at around 1,200 miles per hour. Of course, if only Arnold had seen this thing, then people probably wouldn't believe him. But he wasn't the only one to witness it. A man named Fred Johnson also saw the lights and object. That same day, around the same time, he saw the object through his telescope. He also claimed that the object, whatever it was, interfered with his compass. Arnold was just going to dismiss what he saw as a mirage until Johnson came forward explaining he saw it too. In our second spot, we have the Flatwoods Monster. On September 12, 1952, 7 individuals and a dog witnessed a UFO. And then they saw what they believed to be an alien. So on this day, 6 boys aged 10 to 16, a mom and a dog were at the park playing. While doing so, they saw a pulsing red light flash across the sky and then crash down. 3 of the boys ran to go get one of the boys' mom to then go check it out. The dog followed. When they neared the area where the thing crashed, they saw a 10-foot tall Frankenstein-like monster. That's how they described it. Even the dog was afraid and ran away from it. Apparently this monster had blood red eyes, a green face, and it glowed. It even had claws. One of the boys was so afraid he actually peed his pants. I mean, it would sound fishy if it was just a group of boys that claimed to see a UFO and alien, but then the mom saw it too and verifies that this story is true. And in our number 1 spot, we have the Berkshire's UFO. This undoubtedly is the most mysterious and scariest UFO sighting and encounter on this list. On September 1st, 1969, something happened that changed the lives of multiple people in Berkshire County forever. So on that day, a bunch of people claimed to have seen a number of strange lights. Some people even claim that they were abducted by this bright light, or randomly time passed and they don't know what happened for the hours lost. One of the people that witnessed this was Melanie Kirchdorfer. That night, her and her family went to a Dairy Queen to get ice cream. Then they went to a nearby lake. While her father backed into the parking lot at the lake, a strange aura came around the car. They don't remember much after that, but Melanie remembers being levitated and then being on a spaceship. Another man named Tom Warner remembers being on the spaceship as well, and remembers seeing Melanie beside him. Before that, they never even knew each other. That same night, Jane and her friend Mary were driving home when they saw several bright lights in front of them. Her and a couple of the other cars actually pulled over because the lights were so bright that they couldn't see where they were driving. When they got out of their car, they saw a huge object floating over the road in front of them. And many other people also shared several stories from that night as well. So it's quite creepy that many people came forward, all random individuals with no relation to each other, but had such similar stories. Starting off this countdown, we have the Belgian UFO wave. From November 29th, 1989 to April 1990, residents in Belgium reported thousands of UFO sightings. Over this 5-month period, 13,500 people claimed to see a large, silent, triangular object hovering in the sky. 2,600 of these residents actually filed written statements on them. In spring of 1990, a number of military fighter pilots also saw this craft. They proceeded to chase it, but it ended up disappearing out of sight before they could see what was up with it. The government was like, oh, they're just helicopters. But helicopters are loud and not triangular, so nice try. Others believe that citizens were going delusional from eating chips with mayonnaise. Yes, you heard me correctly. I mean, it's a disgusting combo, but you're not gonna hallucinate and see spaceships from eating it. But let me know in the comments below, how do you dip your fries and what sauce? Coming in at number 9, we have Kenneth Arnold. In 1947, pilot Kenneth Arnold was traveling to Washington for a business trip when he saw a bright light reflecting off the side of his plane. That's when he saw 9 aircrafts flying by him in a V formation. He claims that these crafts were moving at 1,700 miles per hour. In fact, this sighting gave birth to the name flying saucer. In a report, Kenneth said that they were moving as a saucer if you skip it over water. But the newspapers were like, saucer! He said it was a saucer! So yeah, that's the origin story of that word. To this day, we still don't know what Kenneth saw. And then later that year, the Roswell UFO incident happened. Coincidence? I think not. In our 8th spot, we have the first reported UFO. The first reported UFO sighting in America was in 1639 and was recorded by Massachusetts Governor John Winthrop. He claims that on March 1st, a man named James Everall was out on his boat when he saw a great light in the sky. It stood still, just hovering in the sky, and was described as being squarish in shape. When the lights disappeared, James and his boating pals found themselves 1 mile upstream, although they have no memory of ever traveling there.
Moving on to number 7, fear of coming forward. So branching off of my last point, during the hearing, much of the discussion centered on improving the process for reporting unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAPs, but Grush was also there to promote removing the stigma for aviators who report UAP sightings and to ensure oversight of government programs that investigate them. The former intelligence officer told the panel that he and several other colleagues have been the targets of what he calls administrative terrorism, and that he has at times feared for his life since coming forward. Which, I mean, would make a lot of sense if that's true, why a support group was put in place for those who report UAPs. Quote, "It was very brutal and very unfortunate. Some of the tactics they used to hurt me both professionally and personally," he said, adding that there is currently an open investigation into the matter. Moving on to number 6, safety issues. One of the major arguments this hearing was intending to focus on was that in not reporting or in discouraging reports, we are creating a national safety issue, and there is a push for intelligence agencies to be more transparent about UAPs in order to promote national safety. Supporters of this, like Democratic Rep. Robert Garcia of California, said, quote, "UAPs, whatever they may be, may pose a serious threat to our military and our civilian aircraft, and that must be understood. We should encourage more reporting, not less, on UAPs. The more we understand, the safer we will be." Grush, Graves, and Fravor all echoed similar sentiments, explaining they would like to see a, quote, "safe and transparent reporting system." The men added that they are hopeful the public discourse is the first step towards eliminating the stigma and reports of UAPs to encourage others to come forward. Moving on to number 5. People have been hurt. So according to Grush, not only have there been some pretty sneaky cover-ups as well as some shady treatment to those who come forward, but people have also been harmed and threatened in order to not reveal information. Grush details that as a former intelligence officer, he would go to jail for revealing classified information, but when he was asked whether anyone had been harmed or injured to cover up information about extraterrestrial technology, he answered yes. Now that alone is scary enough, but even more wild is that when he was asked if anyone had been killed, he said he had, quote, "directed people with that knowledge to the appropriate authorities." Now, I get it, he can't say yes or no because it's classified and all, but that's kind of a creepy answer. Feels like he's trying to tell us yes without telling us that. Now, on the other hand, a spokesperson for the Pentagon, Sue Gao, told NBC News that Grush's claims are false, but I mean, I don't know, man. What do you guys think? Coming in at number 4. Sightings are not rare. According to former Navy pilot and executive director of Americans for Safe Aerospace, Ryan Graves, it wasn't just the 2004 incident that raised some eyebrows. Graves also talked about an incident with a flying object off the coast of Virginia Beach in 2014. He said that while flying an F-18, he came across an aircraft that looked like a, quote, dark gray or black cube inside of a clear sphere, which sounds pretty UFO-y if you ask me. Graves estimated the aircraft to be 5 to 15 feet in diameter and unlike any aircraft he has ever seen. But even more peculiar than its shape was that Graves claimed the UAP could remain stationary despite hurricane force winds. And according to Graves, sightings like this one are not rare, are not isolated. Plus, he explained that his squadron submitted a safety report at the time, but that he received no official acknowledgement of the incident. Moving on to number 3. A very small amount get reported. Now, despite the fact that Graves claims sightings are not rare and the fact that it feels like there is always a new UFO sighting popping up, officially speaking, there are apparently not very many sightings that actually get officially reported. Graves estimates that roughly 5% of UAP sightings are reported. Again, mostly due to stigma. Quote, I urge us to put aside stigma and address the security and safety issues this topic represents. If UAP are foreign drones, it is an urgent national security problem. If it is something else, it is an issue for science. In either case, unidentified objects are a concern for flight safety. The American people deserve to know what is happening in our skies. It is long overdue. So hopefully this whole situation means more sightings will be reported following the hearing. I guess we will have to wait and see. Moving on to number 2, they really are more advanced. Back to retired Navy Commander David Fravor. I touched a bit in a previous point about his 2004 video he captured, but we're actually gonna circle back because there is a little more. Not only was this small tic-tac shaped flying object flabbergasting because they didn't know what it was, but according to Fravor, quote, there were no rotors, no rotor wash, or any visible flight control surfaces like wings. Plus, Fravor explained that as he and the other pilots tried to get closer to the mysterious craft, quote, it rapidly accelerated and disappeared right in front of our aircraft, leaving behind no detectable turbulence. Which essentially means whatever it was and whoever created it has far more access to superior technology than we do here on Earth. Fravor said, quote, I'm not a UFO fanatic, but what we saw with our 4 sets of eyes, we have nothing close to it. It was incredible technology. Similarly, Grush alleged at another time that the military had misused funds allocated for other programs to try to reverse engineer some of the supposedly non-human technology. And last up in our number 1 spot, there are still unanswered questions. While there was certainly some juicy deets revealed at the hearing, we were also left with even more questions and still a few skeptics. Representative Eric Burleson of Missouri said he found it far-fetched that an extraterrestrial species was technologically advanced enough to travel to Earth, yet is, quote, somehow incompetent enough to survive Earth and crash. NASA also weighed in, saying that scientists have been searching for signs of life in our universe for years, but they have so far come up short. The space agency's missions have studied water on Mars, explored the ocean worlds, Titan and Europa, and looked for molecules that could be a sign of life in the atmospheres of alien planets, but claim that our understanding of life is still a bit fuzzy and ever-changing. Now, all of that being said, as per the Planetary Society, it is, quote, very unlikely that Earth is the only home to intelligent life. So, we may be onto something here. I guess we'll just have to wait and see until more information is revealed.